our map itself is looking pretty good already. So it's now time that we add our player to it, meaning our chicken model. To do this, we'll of course need the model itself. We have created our chicken model using the software Magica Voxer, which you can find a dedicated lecture on in this course, if you are interested in creating your own models. You can of course use the model we've created, and you can find it in the resources folder as always. To be able to use it in our games, we will have to make sure it is included in our art.sceneassets folder. So just like before with our images, I will bring up the folder and our resources folder, and I will now just copy the chicken.sen file and the chicken.png files into the art.sceneassets folder, and as soon as I've done that, they automatically appear in my project, where I want to select the chicken.sen file, just to see what's in it. We can see our chicken model, and if I select it in the left navigator here, we can see that the node is called player. That is also what you need to change if you plan to use your own models and it has a different name. There aren't many properties set on this node. One is the diffuse property in our material inspector, which is set to chicken.png. If I would change this to white, we can see that our model is now plain white. And as soon as I select the chicken.png file, the texture gets properly wrapped to our chicken model. This works because the PNG file was generated when exporting the model from the Voxer software. So we don't have to manually change any scaling or such. If I select the identity inspector, we can see that the name player, which I already talked about, but it is important since we will use this name to initialize our node later on. We can also see the scale of this node is set to 0.05. If we take a look at the bounding box below with the width 13, height 24 and depth 19, it is really big, and since we want it to fit on our lanes, we will have to make sure that its width and depth don't exceed value 1, which in this case is achieved by scaling it down appropriately. If you choose to just use this model, you won't actually have to change any of these values since they should already be set correctly. But if you do use your own model, you should make sure that it is scaled correctly. The name is player and your texture is applied correctly. I can go back to my game view controller where I will add a new property below light node as a variable called player node, initialized as an empty scene node. Just like we did with any other element of our game, we will create a custom method to add our player, which will be added directly below setup scene and will be called setup player without any parameters. I want to call this method from viewDidLoad right after calling setup scene, so that our player actually gets added to our scene and we can implement the setup player method, which will actually be pretty simple. We do have our model.scn file, which we need to extract the model node from. To be able to do so, we first need the scene from this scn file, which I can get by defining a constant called player scene and setting it to scn scene named art.sceneassets/chicken.scn. Since this will only return an optional value, I will wrap this in a guard statement. And if I get nil, I can just add a return statement in the else part to abort the method, since I will need this player scene for the next step. Below this guard statement, I can now safely assume that player scene contains a valid scene. I can then use an if-let statement to try and assign the player node from the scene to the player node property in my class. Since we've just seen that the node in our SCN file is called player, I will now try if that player is equal to player scene.root node.child node with name, and for the name I will of course say player. The other parameter of this method, which is called recursively, will get the value true. All this means is that the method will look through child nodes of child nodes as well. Technically, this won't be needed here, but it is usually how we are going to use this method to extract nodes from scene files. If I now successfully got this node, I can assign it to my player node by writing player node and setting it to player. I now want to set the position for my player node and then add it to the scene. So let's set player node.position to a SCN vector 3 with x, y, and z values. Theoretically, we could leave all three at 0 to just position our chicken in the middle of our screen. Since our grass lanes, however, are slightly higher than the ground, I want to position our chicken at 0.3 for the y value, so that it doesn't look like it's standing inside of our ground. Now all that's missing is calling scene.rootNode.addChildNode.playerNode to add our chicken to the scene. Now let's run the app again, and if we did everything right, we should see our chicken standing in the middle of one of our lanes. The app started, and we can actually see our chicken in the middle of our road down here. The camera perspective is still kind of directly from the top when it comes to our chicken model, and we might need to fix this later on. But for now, it's fine. And we're happy that we've successfully added our first 3D model to our game. The chicken also is currently still facing the wrong direction, but we will fix this by implementing user interactions to actually move our player node, which will allow us to jump forward or to the left and right. To do this, we'll need scene actions to animate our movements and not just change the position abruptly. We'll trigger these actions with swipe gestures. So for example, to jump forward, we'll just swipe up on our screen. And this is what we're going to look at next.